have public participation. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board. Are there any members of the public who'd like to talk with us about anything? Seeing no movement to the podium, that brings us to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. LaFerla. At this time, I'd like to invite Ms. Ostrowski to the podium. We will be recognizing students this evening.
We sure will, and good evening.
Good evening.
I'm pleased, as always, to get to introduce to you some outstanding students who are representing our school district on a broader scale. First of all, I would like to introduce you to Abby LaSalle. She is an outstanding track and field athlete, and I would like to invite her and her coach, Tracy Stoops, to join us and tell us a little bit about her phenomenal season. Congratulations.
Hi, everyone. I'm Coach Stoop. This is Abby LaSalle. She is a sophomore at Abraham Lincoln High School. She represented our state in the girls' state track and field competition in May, and she ran the 400-meter hurdles. She placed 8th, and which gives you a medal in a state point, which was outstanding. But not only did she compete at the state level, but she was an outstanding athlete for our girls track team, and she really, really worked hard. We also had 3 other girls that participated in the state meet that weren't here tonight, but Abby definitely stood out. And she works really, really hard, and we're so excited to have her as part of the team. So congratulations to Abby, and thanks for all you do.
Oh, gosh, okay. Abby gets a special commemorative keychain that's in the shape of a star, and we will have her official trophy for her very soon, and we'll get it to you. Okay?
Great job.
Sophomore.
Oh.
No pressure.
That's right.
All right, tonight we are also celebrating our 5 Air Force Junior ROTC cadets who have excelled at the national level. They competed at the Daytona Beach, Florida competition on May 1st in the all-services drill competition that included the most elite junior ROTC teams in the nation. Get that. So they are joined here tonight by their parents and also by Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Bush, who's an instructor with our ROTC program. I'm going to read you a little bit, and then I'll invite the students up to be greeted by Dr. Murillo. Cadet Grace Conant commanded cadets Gideon Welsh, Jacqueline Bunton, Eliza Fries on the color guard team, leading them to an 8th place finish. Cadet Garrett Foster served as an alternate. Cadet Fries also then went on to compete in the individual event in which she was competing against 300 of the most seasoned and disciplined drill commands or cadets nationwide. Individual drill down is what they call it. It consists of cadets responding to drill commands barked out by the judge while being scrutinized from all sides and angles by other eagle-eyed judges, according to Master Sergeant Lane. Whenever an incorrect movement is made, the cadet is eliminated. When the dust settles, Cadet Fries was the last one standing, besting all others and bringing home the gold. Cadet Fries, would you join Dr. Murillo to be recognized? There she is, right here. Cadet Fries will be a senior this coming year and continue her leadership. Shall we wait and do them all, or let's do her first? Yeah. Well, yeah. We have. Stay up there, would you? Okay, that sounds good. We also have Cadet Gideon Welsh, who's part of our national placing drill team. Gideon, would you join Dr. Murillo? Gideon is a graduate now, but he said he will be coming back to serve as a coach in the program. So thank you for continuing your leadership. And okay. Okay, good. The others had commitments. It's summer. They work and are playing sports. So thank you both for representing your team and for your leadership and for making us very proud. Okay, congratulations. And thank you to the parents for all your support of the ROTC program.
Oh, they're here?
There you go, okay, there you go.
Then we'll do another group picture too.
Okay. Let's continue this fun, shall we?
I hate to walk in front of Diane, and I hate to. Awesome, that's great.
Yes, I'm so glad.
Yeah. Okay, they're assuming their positions are in. Do you want to talk about them? Sure. Okay.
We have shared with the board and those watching tonight that you all competed at the National Drill Competition and placed 8th overall nationwide. So we're very proud of you. Congratulations. We have Garrett Foster, Jacqueline Button, and Grace Conant.
Okay, so now we're going to do another photo. Come on. Yeah, we'll get a little closer.
Okay, all right. This is the one that's going to make the publication. That is awesome. You guys all look great. Congratulations. Thanks for coming, guys. Thank you. You're going to work out to get here? Thank you. Thank you guys so much for inviting us.
Congratulations.
Diana, do you have that? You don't have the CD. Okay, what is it next? Do I go right into the next one? Yeah. Okay. And now I will invite Dr. Vorthman to join me at the podium. He's going to provide an update on our spring 2021 MAP results.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Murillo. It's my pleasure tonight to provide the board with an update on our spring 2021 MAP results. As you recall, we provide the MAP assessment to our students 3 times during the school year, and then we provide a regular update to the Board of Education at those 3 regular intervals as well. First tonight, I want to take an opportunity to thank all of our parents, our students, our teachers, administrators, support staff members who really made spring MAP testing a success this year. As you can imagine, trying to navigate the hurdles of a pandemic year, along with an elongated testing season this year between MAP testing, advanced placement tests, ISASS tests, I think kids were probably pretty tested out by the end of the year. But this data is really important to us as we use it to evaluate the effectiveness of our programs, and also we use it to benchmark ourselves against our district goals. So as you recall, we have 4 district goals. The first and foremost of those is to improve student achievement for all students in our school district. And we have 3 targets that we use to measure success against. The first is ensuring that we have 80% of our students that are scoring in the top 3 categories of the MAP assessment in reading and math. The second 2 are growth related. The first being that we expect 60% of our students to meet their individualized growth targets, which, as you recall, is a stretch goal that we've set after we surpassed our initial goal of 50%. And then lastly, we expect all of our students to show some growth during the year during MAP testing. So tonight I want to share with you how we did this spring and kind of look back to comparisons to the fall and certainly an unprecedented school year, to say the least. But there are a couple of themes that emerged from the data and a couple of themes that I want to share with you tonight. First and foremost is an idea related to the mental health of our students and our staff members, as well as an idea called COVID fatigue. And whether we believe it or not, COVID fatigue is a real thing. On my way to the office this morning, I actually heard an interview with a researcher and a physician on the East Coast who said that roughly 1/3 of all Americans right now suffer from some type of mental distress, whether that's anxiety or depression or dealing with some type of trauma in their life. And that's a really alarming number. And we certainly think that in this unprecedented school year that we had, our staff members, our families, our community members, and our students were under a great deal of uncertainty. And that's what this researcher really defines as COVID fatigue, as this idea of how our nervous systems try to respond to not knowing what's going to happen next. And our kids really and our teachers did remarkable this year, considering the changes that were thrown at them and the ability for them to adapt in an ever-changing situation. Second thing we noticed this year is that attendance matters. It's not like we didn't know that before. We certainly did. It's not a new phenomenon that we've been dealing with. But what we learned is it really mattered even more this year than it had in past years. And so when you think back to where we started with a school closure from March to May of 2020, and then starting the year in a hybrid setting, moving to a full closure for a couple of days in December, going back to hybrid for November and December, coming back in January full time. This really affected all of our families differently. Some had to stay home because of a frail person in their home. Some were subject to quarantine. Some were sent home early with symptoms from school because of a loved one or a sibling may have had symptoms of COVID. And this idea of absenteeism impacting student achievement was certainly manifested this year, like it has been in previous years. When we look at the percentage of students who are chronically absent, and that's a metric we use that's defined as a student who misses 10 or more days of school in a school year, you can see that the pink lines show you the percentage of students who are chronically absent in 2018-19. And you can see in 2020-21, the yellow bars, that shows the significant increase, especially among our high school and middle school students this year. In fact, we saw very little change in elementary, but quite a significant change in our secondary schools. So I just want to set that context as we think about what student achievement looked like during this year. So for mathematics, when we look at the change in number of students scoring at the top 3 categories from fall all the way through to spring, we had a slight decrease of about 1.2%. And as you recall, we had a slight uptick from fall to winter, and we had just a slight decline from fall to spring. And this, you can see, really hit us in a couple of different ways. We actually saw quite a bit of improvement in some of our grade levels in our elementary schools. This line shows, the blue line here shows where we were at fall. And anywhere where the purple bars are higher than the blue line, those were grade levels in which we increased. So you can see most of our elementary grades either maintained or increased from fall to spring. But you can see there's a gap between our middle school and high school grades, and that's where we did not see improvement over the course of the school year. More specifically, you can see that in individual cohorts, all except our second grade made significant improvements in elementary school from kindergarten through 5th grade, but we did see declines in our high schools and middle schools, most notably in 7th and 8th grade in our middle schools in math. When we look at the percentage of students who met their growth targets, you can see that for all grades except second at the elementary, we hit our 60% target. So our elementary students were able to not only grow their proficiency, but also meet their growth targets, which is a great celebration for us. You'll see that in our secondary schools, we had hovered right around the 40% mark, and that's typical of what we've seen in previous testing periods as well. When we turn our attention to looking at students making any growth, you can see that we are near or at 100% in first, second, and kindergarten first and second grade. It tapers off a little bit in third and fourth grade, but our secondary schools really struggled this year to show growth from fall to winter. What's interesting is I wanted to see what this looked like when I compared it to the percentage of students who were not chronically absent. So the kids who missed fewer than 10 days. And remarkably, the line looks almost identical in terms of slope to the percentage of students meeting their growth targets. Very consistent in elementary school, but it declines quite rapidly as we get to secondary school, both at non-chronic absenteeism and meeting their growth targets. When we look at the percentage of students who met their growth targets and scored at the high average and high levels by subgroups, you can see that we are pretty consistent from fall to spring in terms of students meeting their growth targets, regardless of the group that our students are in, whether they have an IEP, are an English language learner, are African American or Hispanic or white. We're pretty consistent across the board that all of our students, for the most part, achieve growth at the same levels. We do have a few slight variances in terms of the disproportionality between some of our subgroups and academic achievement. I would note that we looked most recently at the Department of Education's achievement gap analysis and looked at their report on state assessment to see what the gaps were between racial subgroups and majority subgroups. And I can tell you that ours are much, much, much closer than those are across the state. We actually are closing the gap for some of our subgroups right now in terms of mathematics, and you'll see later in reading. So our reading performance took the biggest hit. It was down 4% from the fall. One of the things that I would caution you about this data point is when we brought you winter test results in the winter of 2020, one of the things I told you I was most concerned about is we had made over 4% improvement in one testing period. And I was concerned that that was a sustainable rate of increase. I think that one of the things that happened is certainly because we had that momentum going, it helped us not have a worse performance than this year. 4% is certainly not where we want to be, but you can see we had several grade levels that really, really struggled in the reading assessment. We were most alarmed when we came back in the fall at our early elementary scores because they had missed some pretty key skills going into the pandemic. And you can see that we improved in almost every single grade level in elementary. And our biggest improvement was the grade level that we were the most worried about, and that was our second grade. We were able to make quite a bit of improvement. In fact, you can see that that is the spike, where we really focused our energy and our resources in getting those incoming second graders, those foundational skills is where we made the most improvement over the year. Again, you'll see that the line looks very similar in our secondary schools. In visiting with the secondary principals, there was a lot of testing apathy in our high schools and middle schools at the end of the school year. They were just plumb worn out, to be honest with you. When we look at the percentage of students that are meeting their growth targets, you can see that in our elementary schools, they hovered right around that 50% mark. And secondary schools continue to hover around the 40% mark. And once again, you'll notice that the percentage of students who are making any growth looks much similar to the mathematics score, with about between 90 and 100% of our elementary schools making some growth, and then dipping down to around 50% of our secondary schools. Once again, that line looks very similar when you look at the percentage of students who are not chronically absent and how they scored on the assessment. The reading performance for our subgroups looks very much like the mathematics, only it's a little stronger. We have typically been a little bit stronger in terms of proficiency in reading than we have in math, although in this testing period, math is catching up very, very quickly. And I attribute some of that success in our math area to some real concerted efforts that we've made in changes to curriculum, changes to resources, and really focused professional development in the parts of our instructional coaches and curriculum leaders. But you'll notice that when you look at the pink line across there, that is the growth percentage of students meeting their growth targets. It's very consistent for students regardless of the subgroup that they're in. So 2 points to ponder. I think we will be continuing this year to assess the impact of attendance and how much that really impacted our student achievement this year, probably more this year than in previous years. And the fact that we have to understand and realize that COVID fatigue was real, and it's something that our students are going to need to continue to have support with moving into the future. So on the academic front, we have some things that we need to do to make sure that students are continue to be successful when we see them again in the fall. Obviously, one of the things that Dr. Murillo has challenged us to think about is how we can better support our schools and their attendance teams and making sure that students are at school when they can be. Secondly, from the academic team, we really have to focus on making sure that our core instruction is sound and is of high quality and is meeting the needs of all of our learners. And when it's not, we need to make sure that we have differentiated opportunities for students that meet their needs where they're at. Part of that is leveraging a multi-tiered system of supports that we're working on revamping, and we'll have ready for rollout for some pilots, we believe, in the winter of 2022. We also have an opportunity to bolster some of our supports, both academically and social emotionally, with our ESSER and ARP funds from the federal government, and you'll be hearing more about that in July when we come to you with our ESSER plan for using those funds. We've also bolstered our support for elementary students in math this year, as well as reading through summer school, and have about 200 students that are taking advantage of that opportunity right now. And we also increased the number of opportunities for students receiving credit recovery during the summer school, and we'll do so as well with our high schools next fall when the students come back. So that's kind of a snapshot of our spring map data. I would pause and welcome any questions that you might have this evening.
Dr. Worthman, I guess, what was there in there that, like, I'm assuming we assumed a lot of this was going to happen. What was there that really shocked us that wasn't kind of shared already?
You know, I think the thing that took us by surprise maybe is just how important it is that kids are with us every day. When we dig a little bit deeper, which I'll be going into with our cabinet at our retreat, it's a little bit even more alarming when you look at how our students who are not chronically absent do. They made growth. They made improvements. And our kids who were not with us as much as we wanted to fell further behind.
And also, Dr. Worthman, to follow up on that, some of the chronic absenteeism came because of having to quarantine.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't that our students were just electing not to come to school. Somewhere, and I would say one of the ahas I had, Troy, is that as our students had to stay home and quarantine, it was not as easy for the instructions to still continue when I'm coming in virtually. And that was a struggle for some students. It just wasn't the right learning environment for them. So I think, too, that's an aha, because we thought, okay, well, they're home for 14 days, they have to quarantine, just learn, by remoting in, right? And it just didn't work. And so I really want to caution that we don't think of that our students didn't want to attend school and they elected not to. Some of this had to do with the quarantining that we had to do.
I think it's going to be a while before we see the after effects of the social, emotional well-being that it had on those kids. If they were forced to stay home, and how did they recover from that emotionally? I would have expected a bigger drop, so I commend those that have continued to work one-on-one with those students, recognizing that they were missed.
kind of to piggyback on that, Dr. August, it was also a stress for our teachers that had to be quarantined and out of their classrooms when they never got ill.
Or just doing both jobs.
Yes,
time.
yes.
And virtually, and I think it's not just the kids that we have to focus on and be aware of, it's your faculty and your staff too going forward, because they desperately needed this summer off to rest.
Do we know on those students who voluntarily stayed home, how they compared?
Well, so if you recall, when we went back to the winter data, I showed you some data of our virtual learners versus our non-virtual learners. And where our virtual learners were able to maintain proficiency with our non-virtual learners, they were not able to maintain growth. And so when I looked at that same data point after the first of the year for our winter, from our winter to our spring testing period, we had dramatically reduced the number of virtual learners. We got it to a point where it was very, very few. And from winter to spring, there was very little difference in our scores of our virtual and non-virtual learners, most likely due to the fact that the kids that were attending virtual were the ones that were able to keep up and be self-regulated enough to make sure that they were maintaining their coursework. So we brought back a lot of kids from virtual who were not being as successful as they had previously been.
So this kind of circles back to the online learning presentation that you brought forward, and my concerns that I
Yep.
expressed regarding that, and the decline that we may see in the learning environment, that it may not be appropriate.
It's not great for all kids.
Not face-to-face, there's no interaction, and I'm just concerned that it's gonna reflect in your future time.
And we'll continue to segregate that data and bring it to you disaggregated so you can see how our virtual learners are doing versus our non-virtual learners. Because we want to study it and react to it as much as you want to know how it's going.
And we'll know soon how everyone else did to try to really dive into maybe those best practices that, should we ever go through something like this again, we can implement or not implement, or?
Certainly, we have learned a lot this year on what works and what does not work.
I think COVID, for me, reminded me of just how important schools are for kids, not just for learning, for all of the things that they need. But improving attendance, next year won't be the first time that we have tried to, really make attendance a priority. So I think it might be good to maybe spend a work session on that at some point, or kind of come back with and help the board understand what the strategy is going to be this year and how it's different. Because it is so important. I think that this is just a reminder. We knew that, but this is pointing it out in a different way, I think, for me anyway. Any other questions, thoughts? Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll move into our informational presentations, and Dr. Vorthman is going to present now on an early learning center.
Well, this is an exciting opportunity to share with you some work that has been going on for, almost 3 years, with starting with conversations and dreaming and what if. And tonight, it's my pleasure to bring to you our concept for what we hope will be an early learning center here in the very near future. But before I do that tonight, I want to set a little bit of context for why this work is so important. And I want to thank Mr. LaFurla and the work that he did with the foundation and preparing some of this data and working with alongside us with the foundation and helping us kind of put together really an analysis of why this work is so important. And one of the things that we often point to is a study called the Perry Study. And it's very, very well known in early childhood circles. It's very well known in social welfare circles as far as that goes, because it is the most comprehensive study that's ever been done in our country that took a cohort of students who received access to early childhood education and followed them very closely for 40 years and looked at how they compared to their peers that did not receive early childhood education. And one of the things that they, among others, that they noticed was the decrease in many different social aspects related to those students who received preschool versus those who did not. Earning potential, incarceration rate, literacy, IQ, just to name a few. And what's even more astounding is what they found on the return on investment of early childhood education programs. And what this study found was that for every dollar that's invested in early childhood education, it benefits society basically by over $11. And that's in a combined area of whether that is use of social welfare programs, savings in reduced crime rates and fewer incarceration rates, taxes on earnings, education savings, just to name a few. So we know that early childhood pays. It's just, can we figure out a way to provide it for all of our students so that they all have an opportunity, that they all have an even playing field to be ready for kindergarten, ready for school. So when we look at our own context and drill down a little bit deeper, as we've said multiple times in board presentations before, we serve about 50% of the students who come to us in a kindergarten class with 4-year-old preschool. Another 25% access early childhood education programs through another community provider. And about 25% of our incoming kindergartners have no access to preschool. And so that 25% is really where we're targeting to make sure that we shore up the opportunity so that we can have universal access to early childhood programs for all 4-year-old students in our school district. The problem that we have is that we do not have space to expand. All 32 of our early childhood program classrooms are in 10 of our elementary schools, and our 10 elementary schools, for the most part, are full. And in order to get that additional 150 to 175 slots, we don't have places to put them. The other factors that we need to include are we have more kids than we can serve that qualify for our early childhood programs. As you remember, our programs are prioritized for students who are the most at risk. Students who have at-risk factors or who are living in poverty up to a certain extent, or even students who may be even homeless. And if you look at the poverty rate of adolescents in Council Bluffs, it's alarming. We have 23% of our 5-year-olds live in what is considered poverty. And so we know that if we can provide access to that universal early childhood programming, we can give those kids a leg up when they come to us ready to learn. So what we're proposing is the opportunity to not only build an early childhood learning center that will provide access to preschool, but also Birth to 3 services. And this is a new concept for us in Council Bluffs. We are hoping to repurpose the facility, the footprint of the old Tinley Elementary Building, formerly the Canesville Alternative Learning Center, right at the viaduct of Avenue G and 8th Street. Our goal is to provide 14 classrooms, and of those classrooms, they would provide services to students from birth to age 4. Provide complete wraparound services. What we have learned from some of our research and what works best for students is to make sure that they have wraparound care so that parents aren't shuffling them from school to childcare, back to school, back to childcare, back and forth, so that we'll have complete service from the time that they are dropped off in the morning to the time the parents need to come pick them up. We also plan to have access to health screenings, dental checkups, minor medical, mental health, nutritional services, all under one roof, so that these students and parents can have a community-based approach to serving their needs for our earliest learners. So this is kind of a general layout. If you can imagine on the far right being 8th Street and at the top of the screen being Avenue G. So the building kind of faces the east. Our classrooms would face the east and the playground would be on the east side of the school building. All of the blue spaces are classrooms. which are connected in hubs so that they encourage collaboration, not only between the classrooms, but also the teaching partners. You'll also notice that they connect to outdoor space so that we can utilize the entire physical space of the building, both exterior and interior, as a learning opportunity for our students. The orange spaces are large group areas, whether that's for motor areas, for students to get physical play, for staff and parents and teachers to gather. And the green areas would be wraparound service offices, ways that we would provide opportunities for providers to come in and work with our students. Obviously, one of the things that we've learned through our work with early childhood education is the importance of the Iowa Learning Standards, as well as our work with the Head Start standards. So we're very well versed in what works for students. And really, it's a mixture of both academic standards and play. Authentic opportunities for students to engage and explore and learn by doing. And that's what we expect to emphasize. Our data is incredibly strong when it comes to providing opportunities for students to be ready for kindergarten. That's proven by our GOLD data. If you look at our most recent administration of the Learning Strategies GOLD, which is the state-required assessment for early childhood programs in the state of Iowa, you can see that our students perennially come in at a lower rate than those students across the state that are receiving statewide voluntary preschool. All of our students are at-risk learners. That cannot be said for preschools across the state of Iowa. They are most usually voluntary, so anybody who wants to come can. We prioritize our seats on kids who need it the most. But by the end of the school year, our students have exceeded where the state students are, even though we started out further behind. So we know that we can implement the Iowa Learning Standards at a high quality, and those are the experiences that we want to pass on to our all of our 4-year-old learners, but also use them to harness an opportunity to serve students birth to 3. So we are hopeful to be able to begin the planning and design process. You see we have some preliminary ideas, but we still have some work to do in making sure that those meet the needs of our community and the facility. We have some fundraising to do to be able to afford a building like this. And our goal is to have it open to welcome a new set of 4-year-old birth to 3 students in August of 2023. We project that this facility will cost just a little under $15 million to build, and provided some operational funding and some soft cost, about $17 million to build and operate together. And it's very important that we make sure that we're able to sustain this over the long haul. And so you'll see that there's some money set aside in there for us to get the birth to 3 off the ground, because it is a complicated funding stream that is necessary to be able to fund programs for students who are birth to 3, because there's not a direct funding line that's available for that right now. Although if you listen to some of the things that are coming out of Washington, D.C. and Des Moines, you'll know that it's a priority that everybody's talking about right now, is access to high-quality childcare and early learning. So with that, I would pause, and Dr. Murillo and I would answer any questions that you might have about the Early Learning Center.
Any questions from the board?
No questions, just very exciting.
Thank you.
Very exciting, and thank you and Dr. Murillo for all your hard work, and the board for getting behind the idea, and it's amazing to see.
I just want to say that I sent off a text to Reverend Marvin Armpriester, a proponent of early childhood learning in our district when he was on our school board as president for many years. Haven't heard back from him, but I just thought that all of you should know that he will be very happy to hear that Council Bluffs School District is moving forward with a birth to 4 early childhood learning center. And he would be so very happy to hear that. And I'm just glad to be the first one to let him know that that's happening.
in K-12 and higher ed, there's been an awful lot of talk about cradle to career pipelines for a long time. And I think between this and the Diploma Plus, this is a true cradle to career district.
Will be.
Very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vorthman. At this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Milborn to join me at the podium. He's going to do an informational presentation tonight, and which will provide an overview of the newly adopted Iowa standards for school leaders. I really thought it was important that our community was aware of the new standards. You will be approving board items this evening about the new evaluation tool and adopting that for our district. And also, the board has been really working around the superintendent evaluation, and this will give them a glimpse into central office and principal. So, Mr. Milborn?
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
It's hard to follow the applause, but I'll do my best. Dr. Murillo, Mark Schult, and Miss Kim Kazmierczak and I had the opportunity to attend a two-day training put on by SAI in Des Moines around the new standards that will be in effect next week, July 1st. I'm providing an overview this evening because these new standards are embedded in the professional growth systems we're asking you to approve later on this evening for building principals, central office administrators, and our superintendent. Before we jump into the new standards, some of the key changes, I want to do a little acronym overview here because there's many acronyms that I'm going to refer to multiple times, so I just want to provide an overview. So we had some old standards that were called the ISLIC, okay, and those were the Interstate School Leaders Licensed Consortium Standards. That's a mouthful. And then we had the PISL, Professional Standards for Educational Leaders, and then Iowa always kind of adapts these things, and we call them the Iowa Standards for School Leaders. So to tell you about this journey, in 1996, the ISLIC standards were adopted. And for our administrators in Iowa, there has not been a new standard since 1996. So it's about time, it's a little overdue. But that journey continued in 2008 where the ISLIC, Iowa adopted those standards and called them the ISL. Then in 2015, the ISLIC they were revised and they became the PISL. I know, right? So we were still using, our Iowa standards were still reflecting the ISLIC while the PISL came into play. In 2017, Iowa started working on these, on adopting them. They were going to roll out last year, but the pandemic hit, which put everything on pause. And in 2017, SAI, the School Administrators of Iowa, recruited many administrators across the state to work on the standards and the progressions and sort of Iowanize them. And Kim Kazmierczak was a key part of that over the last couple of years. And so that leads us to next week where the new standards are in place and tonight where they're embedded in our professional growth systems. So a little side-by-side comparison here before we get into some finer detail. The ISLIC, the old standards, had 6 major standards there. And then the PISL, which we are adopting in Iowa as well, has 10 standards. And so you can see that the PISL correlates to multiple of the 6, and then there's a few additions that I'll touch on here in a minute. So there are the 10 standards. I tried to get them on one slide, so I'll let you read those a little bit. But the key thing I want to point out here is many of these standards now contain a why statement. And so a why statement for the proposed action. So we have, mission, values, and core values, why, to promote student well-being and student learning and achievement. So that is a big difference in these. And the major idea from our training on these standards was these are a model professional behavior. So they're intended to be adapted and fit the context of a UEN school and a rural school. And together they they create a framework and a compass for districts to use. So these are the 10 standards that are in law. And then I'm going to share some resources that come along with these from the work that our administrators did across Iowa. So this is what is in our professional growth system and what our principals and central office administrators, and you've seen as a board, you have the standard at top there, and then below you have this continuum with some progression. So this is a key change and a key resource that was provided to us. You can see there those three columns from the right have developing, effective, and highly effective. And once again, these progressions that I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but those descriptors down below are not a checklist. They're just a guide for you to start having conversations with your coach, with your supervisor about your performance. And if you fall anywhere in there, you're just meeting the standard. So at the end of the day, we're saying, do you meet standard 1 or do you not meet standard 1? So an idea of a progression would be around standard 4 here. This talks about curriculum and instruction. And the big idea in this one talks about, let me see if I grab my notes here, I'm sorry. It's way smaller on my screen than I thought it was. There it is. So in this one, it says, establishes time and creates opportunity, right? And then when we move across here, it talks about you move from establishing time to ensuring implementation. And then when you move across to this one, it talks about a systemic process in building individual capacity within the building. So a developing administrator might be newer to the profession, newer to the job, a more highly effective, not necessarily will grow all the way across. The progression's there. Another idea here is these progressions really help you coach. So as an administrator, if I see myself in developing, I can sit down with Dr. Murillo, or our principal can sit down with their principal coach and talk about how can I move from here to highly effective, and how can I, what action steps can I do, what type of professional development can I engage myself in, what kind of feedback do I need to seek from my employees to get there. And then you have this other that does not meet standard over there, and the nice thing about these progressions there is they're very clear when you're not meeting it, and it can provide some really clear action steps for the supervisor to take with someone that is not meeting standard, and it will help the supervisor create a remediation plan and specific goals and action and strategies to try to move over into that meeting the standard. Another key change I wanted to point out was is there's a new standard around equity and cultural responsiveness. And so PISL identified this back in 2017, but now there's kind of a spotlight on this idea as we've been talking about it together quite a bit. And so we anticipate a lot of principals will have goals around this, and their professional development plans will be around this idea as well. And then another key change in the standard is it talked a lot about all students in the past, and now this talks about each and every single student. So it's really differentiating for every single student instead of just for all students. This is a graphic that breaks the standards into 4 major areas there. The purple one's school improvement, and then you have your core, you have your supports, and you have your drivers. And the reason I'm sharing this with you, one, I feel like it encapsulates the complexity of leadership, and 2, these standards were really created with going back to the idea of student learning and student well-being. So everything a leader does has to somehow tie back into that idea of student learning, student achievement, and student well-being. A nice thing the SAI did and the administrators did as well is when they wrote these progressions, they started with the superintendent progressions. And then from there, they created the central office administrator progressions, and then they created the building progressions. So we haven't had anything like this as a tool to use with our superintendent and our central office administrators. So we're excited about the conversations we'll be able to have around this resource. So next steps moving forward. 2 weeks ago, the principals began examining the new standards and doing some self-assessment, and they will be creating their individualized professional development goals here very soon. Dr. Murillo is engaging cabinet members in our own self-assessment and then articulating our plans. You guys and the board have been engaged, and I know in some training and some talk around that as well, and implementing the learning and processes. And then ongoing, we're building in conversations and checkpoints for self-assessment and feedback and reflection around the progressions as well and around the standards until we get to the end of the year when we decide meets standards or does not meet the standard. So with that, I will take any questions.
Questions from the board? I think we should probably thank Ms. Kazmierczak for her many years of work on this. And I'd also like to thank the board for agreeing to pilot the new standards with the superintendent evaluation.
All right,
Thank you.
And Mr. LaFurla, that concludes our reports for this month.
Thank you, and that brings us to the resolution portion of our agenda. We have several tonight. First up is approval of the professional growth systems for certified staff, building administrators, and central office administrators, as well as the superintendent. Is there a motion?
Resolved that the board approves the professional growth system for certified staff, building administrators, central office administrations, and the superintendent.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Wilson, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Ms. Shudak,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
and Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, and the motion carries. Now we have approval of the employee handbook revisions. Is there a motion?
I can move the board approve the employee handbook for the 2021-2022 school year as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Ms. Shudak,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres, and Mr. Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, and the motion carries. Next, we have approval of continuation of superintendent's employment contract. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the continuation of superintendent's employment contract with the Council Bluffs Community School District as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I don't know, kind of what we had said earlier, I think might be nice. Was that, who said that? Was that Chris? I thought it was awfully nice what you said. Say it again.
Well, we did have a discussion earlier, and I just want to thank Dr. Murillo for your leadership. It has been a challenging year. I think we've recognized that for teachers and principals and administrators and students and parents publicly at these board meetings, but I'm not sure that we've ever recognized that for you, Dr. Murillo. It has been a difficult year, and despite all of the things that our schools and your team have been dealing with, you also managed to make some progress on district goals. And we are just very grateful for your leadership and thankful that you have been with us and plan to stay with us.
See?
Any other discussion?
Dr. Murillo, I wholeheartedly thank you for everything you've done. I do still have a concern from last year to this year that there's some permissive topics in here, and the teachers and the paras don't have the permissive topics. So I hope that you respect my vote, but I appreciate all the work that you hear, and I support you. I just don't really agree with the language in the contract.
Any other comments? Discussion? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
No.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
And Mr. LaFurla.
Yes. And the motion to approve Dr. Murillo's, continuation of Dr. Murillo's contract has been approved. Now we have approval of Meyer Building Solutions contract for the 2021-2022 school year. Is there a motion?
I can move to approve the contract for the Myers Building Solution in the amount of $144,000 plus the expenses for the project management regarding the district-wide security system and the early learning center as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Maybe just for the public, Mr. Meyer will stay on to assist with the Early Learning Center project, and I'm missing something, and the security implementation, yes. Any other discussion? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, and the motion carries. Before us now is redemption of 2017A revenue bonds. Is there a motion?
Be resolved to authorize the redemption of outstanding school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue refunding bonds of the Council Bluffs Community Schools District, State of Iowa, dated October 24, 2017, and directing notice be given.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item?
I guess maybe read the public content portion here. Resolution allows the district to call and redeem the 2017A bonds and then, is it redeem or reissue?
Reissue.
Reissue the 2021 issuance.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Please call the roll.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, and the motion carries. Next, we have a similar resolution of redemption of the 2019 revenue bonds. Is there a motion?
I'll jump in. Be resolved to authorize redemption of outstanding school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue refunding bonds of the Council Bluffs Community School District, State of Iowa, dated March 12, 2019, and directing notice be given.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
And this allows the district to call and redeem the 2019 issuance from the 2021 issuance sale.
Thank you.
Probably means even less, to be honest. But the rates are phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Wilson, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres? Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, and the motion carries. Now we have a resolution directing the sale of approximately $13,825,000 of revenue bonds. Is there a motion?
Might as well keep it going. So be it resolved to approve the sale of approximately $13,825,000 in dollars in school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue refunding bonds, Series 2021.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
And what's the rate on this thing all in? It seems like it's pretty.
Yeah, that's what I handed out earlier. So 25% of what we're going to refinance is currently incurring a 3.4% interest rate, and the other 75% at 2.19. We received 10 proposals, and the lowest rate was Key Bank at 1.029%.
Wow.
That makes sense.
So,
Makes sense.
So we should approve that.
I would recommend that.
Now, this one said,
votes.
their bid was $9,420,000, it says. What's the difference there?
So that is, see the document I have right here. You remember that you had approved to also refinance the 2017B? That's not part of this right now.
Okay.
So that's the total of it. But of the amount of money, 2.422 million is the 2019, and 6.871 million is the 2017 A bonds.
Any other discussion? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres.
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Ms. Shudek,
Yes.
and Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, and the motion carries. Before us now is approval of agreement with Newsela, hope I'm saying that right, Newsela, for secondary social studies instructional materials. Is there a motion?
I can move that we approve the agreement with Newsela for the secondary social studies instructional materials as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
And any discussion? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Ms. Shudek.
Yes.
Dr. Ogres, Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, the motion carries. Now we have approval of agreement with Julie Moneta for elementary social studies curriculum implementation consulting services. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the agreement with Julie Moneta for elementary social studies curriculum implementation consulting services.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Dr. Ogres.
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Ms. Shudek,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, and the motion carries. And the last resolution for tonight is the first reading of a policy, Policy 525, Student Dress Code. Is there a motion?
I can move that we approve the first reading of policy 525 student dress code as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion is second. Any discussion?
I think it's odd because there's no changes, correct, here? Am I reading this right?
Until the second reading. We will have some changes there. Correct, Fran?
Yeah, explain that to me.
Can I ask?
How does that work? How does that work? Exactly.
Right here. No changes. I highlighted.
The second reading will include the administrative regulation that that details the guidelines for student dress. And in there will be some recommended changes that Tim Hamilton has been discussing and reviewing with administrators and others.
And so we can do a first reading without those changes?
We do the first, this policy itself was not going to change, but it's the administrative regulation, the 525.1, that will include the
Okay.
changes recommended. Yeah, yeah, so,
Because the regulations only are required for one reading, so that's why they're always put on the second reading.
And Diane, sorry, will the committee be reviewing that? Are we meeting this one?
no, the administrative regulations typically aren't reviewed by the committee.
That's right.
Typically, they are reviewed by those within the buildings who are administering the policy.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we do have some outstanding policies, but we have not set a meeting to discuss them amongst the policy review committee. We've some more work to do.
Thought I didn't miss it.
You didn't miss it.
Okay,
I'm glad you serve on the committee with us.
Thank you for the explanation. Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Ms. Shudek.
Yes.
Dr. Ogres.
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, the motion carries. Finally, we have the consent agenda, which includes Standing Committee Annual Status Report, gratefully acknowledging and accepting a donation from Mark Church for $300, renewal of the security content filter, special education contracts, personnel agenda, purchasing card transactions, financial reports, and payments from May 15th through June 20th. Is there a motion?
You can move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
I have a question on the content filter that's in this. I don't know if there's anybody here to talk about that. Is that working well for us? I'm just curious. I always wonder how those are doing for our kids.
I asked the same thing.
Like the securely content filter, how that's working with,
That works
are
with our
we,
student Chromebooks. It
Yeah.
does a really good job on regulating the content. They continually update the site, so we're very happy
we're
with it.
happy. Okay.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Minsall?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
And Mr. LaFurla.
Yes, motion carries. And that concludes our business. We are adjourned.
Well,
Have a good evening.
you always wonder, early on, it was like hit or miss.
Why can't I go to YouTube and do this? Dr.
Right,
Marilla, will you
right.